Welcome back to the Nerdy Grill and welcome to a brand new ranking video here on the channel. This time it is a game ranking and it is of a game franchise that I hold quite dear to my heart and one that I have found more interesting the longer time has gone on. Now, before the jump for me from Xbox to PlayStation, I never really took an interest in these sort of choose your own path style of games, you know, or horror games where the decisions you make can influence whether a character lives, dies, and etc, etc. And obviously I heard everything that went on about Until Dawn, and eventually when I got a PlayStation 4 I picked up Until Dawn, and then I heard about a new game series that was coming out called The Dark Pictures, which became the Dark Pictures Anthology, which featured 4 games in Season 1, Man of Medan, Little Hope, House of Ashes, and The Devil in Me, with Season 2 kicking off this year with Directive 8020. And I thought I would do a ranking of all 5 of the core main games, because literally only a couple of days ago, me and my fiance, who we play through these games together, split characters in order to have a bit of a fun laugh and see what ending we can get. We completed Directive 8020, and so I wanted to go back, look over the other games, and determine which one is my personal favourite and why. So as you can see here, we've got 5 games down the bottom. We've got Man of Medan, which came out in 2019. We got Little Hope in 2020. House of Ashes in 2021, which was the first one that I played with my fiance. Then we got 2022's The Devil in Me, and then the big jump of 2026 for Directive 8020. And we've got 1 to 5, so the 5th one is my least favourite in the franchise, with the first one being my favourite game in the franchise. Now, I must admit, all 5 of these games I think are really, really good in their own right. Obviously, some are better than others, so this is just my personal opinion. So if obviously I put one in the top spot that you think is the 3rd spot or 4th spot, 'cause you're not a big fan of it, that's perfectly fine. But let's just keep all comments respectful, please, because we're all going to be different. But what I will say is all these games are good. There's not a game here that I hate. There is some that I find a little bit more boring than others, but that's down to characters and overall plot not being exactly what I want or what I was looking for within these. But I like the different time periods and the different types of characters we get and the different settings that we get. So, without any further ado, and I also should preference, this is not me going over all supermassive games, because otherwise I'd include things like Until Dawn and The Quarry and stuff like that. I might do a separate video on something like that in the future. This is just the Dark Pictures Anthology and Directive 8020. And I am looking forward to the next game when that eventually comes out. Without any further ado, let's jump straight into this, starting with my least favourite game in the Dark Pictures Anthology. And unfortunately for me, my least favourite Dark Anthology or Dark Pictures game is actually the first one I played with my fiance, and that is going to House of Ashes. Yeah, House of Ashes is going into 5th place for me. Now, like I said, it's not necessarily because it is a terrible game, far from it. And like I said, I do like the premise of the game, which I've got all the premises here as a reminder. It's been a little while since I played some of the earlier ones. So House of Ashes came out in 2021, and it is set at the end of the Iraq War, which has a special forces team that bury underneath into this like temple under the earth, and they start disturbing some unearthly creatures, and they end up having to join forces with their enemies and allies in order to try and survive. And I believe like the core villains, so to speak, or antagonists are these like vampire-esque creatures. Now, in terms of like the tone, I will say, like, the setting when you get underground in, like, the temples and things like that with all the torches and stuff like that is very creepy. You do get that claustrophobic vibe. But I think it takes a really long time to get going in this particular game. The characters aren't as easy to connect with on a personal level. Like, I prefer it when, you know, you've got a group of kids who have just, they're going on vacation and they get entangled with something. You know, something that's more relatable to me. Whereas all of these are, like, sergeants and lieutenants and stuff like that. You know, they're part of like special forces and army-based people, which, you know, it gives them a different vibe, and you don't feel as if like they're in any way as much of a threat as previous ones, because they like trained for specific situations. Now I know this is a bit of a different situation, but you know, they seem a lot more brave and a lot more, you know, tough than other protagonists. And I quite like it when you're sort of the underdog, but you don't feel that with this game. And it is very slow paced. Like, you go through this whole training program and everything to start with, and it just takes a while to get going. And so for me, it sort of takes me out of the immersion. And yeah, I'm just not a massive fan of that one. I've only played this once or twice. It is my least played of all the Dark Pictures games. But me and my fiance said we are going to give it another chance because we haven't played it in a couple of years, and so we feel like we should give it another chance, and maybe then we will like it a lot more. So that is what I am willing to do in order to hopefully like this game a lot more than what I do currently now. But it's not a terrible game, and I definitely recommend playing it. Definitely don't skip it within the Dark Pictures anthology, the first 4 in Season 1. Definitely play it because, you know, you will have a good time. Then my next least favourite game in the Dark Pictures anthology is going to Little Hope, which is the second game in the Dark Pictures anthology, which came out in 2020, the COVID year. And look, in terms of the premise of this game, so this one we follow college students, 4 college students and their professor, who get trapped in this isolated, abandoned little town, pursued by nightmarish apparitions through a thick, impenetrable fog that stops them and prevents them from leaving the town. And there's the overwhelming theme of like witch trials and stuff like that going on. And they have like these like flashbacks to, you know, back and you'd see like people getting burned as witches and this, that and the other, and they are all the characters that we are playing as in the main core game, which I do like all the characters in the main core game from Little Hope. So you've got Andrew, John, Daniel, Taylor and Angela as our core characters. So you've got Angela, Taylor, Daniel and Andrew are like the college students, and then you've got John, who is the professor who's trying to look out for them. But yeah, they are all very, very different. You can relate to them in some way. There's at least one character you know you'll connect with, but there's a bit of a twist going on, and we find out that Andrew is actually made up all the people that he is sort of hanging out with. You know, he's not actually this young boy who's going to college with these people. He's actually this like bus driver, this lonely bus driver who's like made these people up. And it's a really weird twist at the end. And there's so many variety of different endings that you can get by the end of this game, depending on who you've got killed, who you survived, and how you've interacted with certain characters through the game as well, which I thought was quite nice. You know, the setting of the town of Little Hope is quite creepy and eerie. It's got a good atmosphere. But I think what Little Hope suffers with in particular, which is why it's so low, is it's probably the easiest of all the Dark Anthology, at least Dark Pictures Anthology, if you ask me personally. It was the first game in this franchise, and still the only game in this franchise so far, where I've managed to do a flawless run on my first attempt at the game. I managed to save everybody from the get-go. It was quite easy. It's quite easy to avoid getting caught and in trouble, and they're very forgiving, which is a bit of a problem, because I don't want it to be too difficult where it's frustrating and I feel like the deaths aren't warranted, but I need a little bit of challenge, you know, because it's a horror game at the end of the day, and I want a bit of tension, whereas if I think it's too easy, it's going to draw me out of it, and that's the problem. But like I said, character-wise, it's really, really good. Tension is really, really good. And the atmosphere is really, really good. I just think it's the difficulty, despite what the setting you might play it on, it is just a bit of an easy ride, if I'm being perfectly honest. But yeah, it's a fun one. It is a fun one. And I definitely prefer it over House of Ashes. Mainly because I connect to the characters a lot better. And I prefer the setting of the little town of Little Hope as opposed to the underground temples of House of Ashes. Then coming in third place then, I have got the first one from the Dark Anthology, the video game Man of Medan. Yeah, which came out in 2019. I remember actually buying this one physically. Because all the rest I got for like Christmas and stuff like that, but I remember buying Man of Medan in the store when it was brand new and finding it really, really intriguing and interesting, so I really do like Man of Medan. So Man of Medan, so you are 5 friends who are on holiday. They go on this little diving expedition trip, and then they get trapped aboard this old World War II era ghost ship where some crazy goings on is happening, and they start hallucinating and there's like a curse that's going on. But yeah, it does start off on a nice diving trip where you get to know the characters, and they are a good group of characters. You've got Alex, Brad, Julia, Conrad, and Fliss, who are your main protagonist characters that you play as. And then there's a couple of other side characters like Olsen, who's this like leader of this pirate group who interacts with our main characters, who tries to overtake their boat to try and steal the gold from the ship of Medan, and they end up getting entangled with all the hauntings that's going on the ship. I'll say the claustrophobic feeling of the ship is really, really good, and I think this really benefits this one in particular. I think the group of characters you've got, you know, just this random group of teenagers or early 20s, you know, kids who are just out there having a laugh, who get entangled in this pretty serious, twisted curse, I think is quite good and quite interesting. There's lots of good ways that you can get killed off in this. Great visuals, great jump scares. It is definitely, you know, teeters on middle of the road to in the higher tier of the Dark Pictures, and does set the standard for the Dark Pictures games. And something that I haven't actually mentioned throughout this video so far, but obviously in all these games, apart from one game, but there is an Easter egg for it, they split up the chapters a bit like an Until Dawn, with a character known as the Curator, who is a fantastic character. I love the Curator scenes, who is this like overwatching figure who is basically telling us the stories of what's going on and telling us how we're getting on through the game, you know, what decisions we're making. He can sort of predict what's going on. And I'm really interested to see where he goes going forward. I know there's been some upset and some things due to, like, the person who does the body, the facial sculpt of the actor who does the Curator is obviously passed away, so they're going to have to try and figure out what they're going to do there. But since he's like an eternal being by the looks of it, they could obviously change that. So, and I do hope we see the Curator again in some way, shape or form, because obviously he was sorely missed in Directive 8020, but he did have an Easter egg and a little clip which you can unlock, which I have seen, and it is nice to see him in Season 2, so we'll see what happens going forward. But yeah, I quite like that, and yeah, Man of Medan is a good way to kick off the franchise, if you ask me. So I would definitely recommend playing Man of Medan. Now, the last two games, The Devil in Me and Directive 8020. So in second place for me, I'm going to go with The Devil in Me. Now, yeah, I quite liked The Devil in Me. So The Devil in Me came out in 2022. So it's the last game in the first season of the Dark Anthology, the first 4 games. And it features like a documentary film crew who get this mysterious random invite to a modern day replica of H.H. Holmes' infamous murder castle on this weird little island, where they end up getting captured, manipulated, and haunted by maybe the potential spirit of this famous serial killer. And it is really, really intense. And you follow the characters of Charlie, Kate, Mark, Jamie, and Erin. And then you've got some side characters of Grantham Dumet, who is the main antagonist, who's chasing you down. And then the references and all to H.H. Holmes is there all around. Now, I will say Devil in Me is probably the most intense of Season 1. It's probably the least forgiving of Season 1, so if you make mistakes, they don't often give you a chance to make up for it as much as the previous games. So the difficulty setting is there. I would say the setting of the island, and then obviously the big H.H. Holmes house, castle, mansion thing is also really, really good. I think it's a lot better when you're inside the murder castle. When you're outside on the island, it does feel a bit too grand a scale to get the tension going. But I will say the lighting effects really help for this game in particular, and it's a pretty decent cast of characters, and I do like the concept as well. Although it does feel at times it's treading on certain grounds of like Little Hope again, but what I will say is that there is enough uniqueness in each of these games to tell them apart, but still some good links to show that they are part of like this one big grand universe that the Curator has put together. But yeah, really do like The Devil in Me, and it was a good end to the first chapter of the Dark Pictures. Speaking of then the end, so then we had a big jump then. Obviously, I knew there was going to be a little bit of a jump between the first season and the second season of the games, which I think there's another 4 or 5 games in the works, so for Season 2. And they kicked it off with a bang, because my first place for the Dark Pictures universe of games at the moment is going to the very first game in the brand new series, it's going to Directive 8020, because out of all these games, and my fiance feels the same way, I was terrified from start to finish in this game. I was petrified. I would pause the game, I would have to take deep breaths. The claustrophobic feel of being out in space was petrifying, and I didn't know where to turn. So it is a sci-fi survival horror. So think of like The Thing, an Alien and stuff like that, and that is exactly what Directive 8020 is. Sci-fi horror following a crew on a colony ship who are struggling to survive on their way to an alien planet where they encounter this like virus, this substance that starts to spread throughout the ship and then starts to create like evil clones and doppelgangers of the main crew and tries to pick them off one by one. And it is scary. The sound design in this game is brilliant and amazing. The lighting effects is great. The characters are phenomenal. And the pacing is really well. They do it in like real chapters in this one as well. There's 8 chapters in particular, and they've incorporated a lot more game mechanics this time that I think were really good improvements. Like there's a messaging service where you can keep talking to your crew in certain intervals and learn new information. And if you learn that information from reading the text messages, then it will help you make decisions later on. It's really, really good. They got like this detective vision stuff that goes on if you think like the Batman Arkham franchise. You know, I really, really like it. There's a lot more unique puzzles this way, and the creatures are just terrifying. And yeah, I must admit, I'm not really one for sci-fi per se. Like, obviously I love Doctor Who, which is mad to say, but I'm not a massive sci-fi lover. But yeah, I really, really enjoyed this like sci-fi horror survival aspect of Directive 8020. Definitely gave me Thing vibes and 100% gave me Alien vibes as well, which is absolutely brilliant. Loved every second of it. In fact, out of all these games, you know, me and my fiance have decided that's the one we want to replay the most. That and House of Ashes, because we actually did quite poor in Directive 8020. We obviously played the whole game, we got to Chapter 8, but we actually lost everyone. We actually got the ending where everyone died. So we need to try and redo that to hopefully get a much better ending. But yeah, so that is my ranking and thoughts of the current era of the Dark Pictures games. So in first place, I got Directive 8020. Second place is The Devil in Me. Third place is Man of Medan. Fourth place is Little Hope. And fifth place goes to House of Ashes. I hope you did enjoy this video. If you did, please like it by giving it a thumbs up and comment down below your thoughts on the Dark Pictures games. And subscribe if you are new. But for now, this is the Nerdy Grail signing off. I hope you've had an amazing day, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye for now, everyone.